the Our World Speaker Series. We're very happy to have you join us tonight. My name is Claire Ross. I'm the Access Manager here at the zoo. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Clean Water, Land and Legacy Amendment, which provides funding to make this event free for all to attend. The zoo would also like to thank our media sponsor for this series, MinPost. Please check out their Earth Journal blog, which covers environmental issues in the news with special emphasis on solutions to environmental challenges. To allow wider access for the presentation, we offer live captioning with an emphasis on live. Our captioner is typing as I speak, having no idea what's going to be said next, and I'm not going to try and figure it out. So we ask in advance for your understanding when words may be incorrect. Now I'd like to introduce James Sanford and Amanda Drews. Jim has been at the Minnesota Zoo for 5 years. He's originally from St. Paul and studied zoology at North Dakota State University. He worked for the Kansas City Zoo for 7 years before returning to Minnesota. Caring for animals at work isn't enough for Jim, so he has a small zoo of his own at home with dogs, cats, frogs, and even a macaw. Amanda works in our zoomobile department here at the zoo, taking care of a variety of animals and going all over Minnesota teaching with them. She recently traveled to Tasmania, Australia under our Ulysses S. Seal grant to help Tasmanian devil conservationists. Please welcome Jim and Amanda.
Thank you. Before I get started, Amanda and I just realized that we both got hired as in new positions 5 years ago from the Clean Water, Land and Legacy Amendment, so we're very happy to see that slide up there. All right, so as I get, oh, there we go. How we brought Down Under up north. So before I get started, I kind of want to talk about the history of seasonal exhibits. We've done quite a few of them here at the Minnesota Zoo over the years. They're a great way to bring in new species, exciting new species, get the zoo's message out there. It's something we can do in between our big permanent exhibits that the Minnesota Zoo is really known for. So things like Rush's Grizzly Coast and other renovations and other projects that you've seen throughout the years. That funding is very costly, and bringing on new staff to man all those, it all adds up. So doing these seasonal exhibits gives us a chance to bring in these unique exhibits without having that permanent structure. And by bringing in these unique experiences, we can help increase attendance at the zoo. Obviously, increased attendance means increased revenue, and increased revenue means more money going into our conservation fund, which is really the bottom line here at the zoo, is to get as much conservation work out there, not only here on zoo grounds, but also across the world. You guys have, anybody who's familiar with the speaker series has seen talks about the conservation work we've done with bison right here in our own backyard, as well as rhinos in Africa, and Amanda will speak more about other conservation done across the world. So some of the seasonal exhibits that we've done here at the Minnesota Zoo that you guys would be familiar with. Most recently we did Africa. We did Africa for 3 separate summers. I believe they were 3 years apart. And with most recently doing it 4 summers ago. But we've also done other ones like white tigers, Asiatic lions, and we're all familiar with the dinosaurs and the bugs and the robots. We're all pretty happy to have living animals back at the zoo for the summer, instead of the kind of cool but done a lot around Minnesota now. Robotic dinosaurs are everywhere. And in fact, in the past we have had a seasonal wallaby exhibit. So wallabies are not at the Minnesota Zoo for the first time. Years and years and years ago, I don't know how long, they were in our Talkin' exhibit for the summer. And apparently, well, 1, you could not walk in there with them. And 2, as soon as the grass grew high enough, you never saw them. But this is the old signage that was a part of that exhibit. So the history of this exhibit, and if you haven't been out there, I encourage you guys to walk on out and check out Kangaroo Crossing. It's a 5-acre mixed species exhibit with kangaroo and wallabies. We also have emu out there, and you actually walk in the habitat with the animals. So a lot of people ask where this idea came from. It actually stemmed from the very first conversations about Kangaroo Crossing happened the last time we did Africa, last time we had the drafts. we were out working with Tony Fisher, the collection manager, and it was myself and many of you I'm sure are familiar with Adam Kenninger, who's the Australian keeper that works on the Tropics Trail, and we had already heard that we weren't getting the bonding money that we thought we were going to get, and we were going to start planning another seasonal exhibit, and we said, you could put kangaroos out here. We were standing like literally right where the gatehouse is at the kangaroo crossing exhibit. We were standing there cleaning up giraffe waste and saying, you could put kangaroos out there. And Adam was like, yeah, they have them all over Australia. And people are really excited about the exhibit. I'm really excited about the exhibit. But as a zoo person, I can tell you it's not the most unique exhibit in zoos. They're fairly common, the walkthrough aspect of kangaroos. If you go to a number of zoos throughout the country, you're going to see that exhibit. Blank Park Zoo has been exhibiting wallabies in a walkthrough habitat like we have for 30 plus years. And like I said, the Kansas City Zoo where I worked had an exhibit similar to this that's been open for 20 years. But it's incredibly popular, and that's why we had said it's really cool. People get really confused because there's no fence anywhere there. And in fact, in Kansas City, we routinely had, your kangaroos are out. Someone should go check on your kangaroos. They're out. They're not supposed to be there. And we had to explain, no. That's how it's supposed to be. So the original concept of the exhibit started a few years ago, about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. We didn't get the green light that the exhibit was happening, but we were told to start other little committees and conversations about the logistics of having an exhibit like this. So we started with small meetings. It was mostly just animal people, the collection manager, veterinarians, and some of the other managers to kind of talk about who, what, where, when, and why. Like, what kind of animals we'd be looking at, what would the concept of the exhibit be. With the vets, it was like, what health concerns do we have to look at with whatever animals that we would bring in. So you can see their exhibit is in what's historically our camel, horse, big side where Africa is. And the initial idea, just when we crudely drew it, was people would walk through under the bridge and walk around the pond like that, and that quickly went away because of how wet it gets. And we started the idea of exactly where the fencing would be and where the path would be. So then last year in 2016 we did get the official green light, and that's when the real meetings kind of started. We had to start looking at the exhibit layout and the theming, what species we were for sure going to get, because this all takes time. So we settled on it being that, again, that 5-acre habitat out on the Northern Trail. We already had the separate holding already established for our African hoof stock. We knew that it was going to be walkabout themed, that we were going to have people out there. And one of the big reasons that we liked the walkabout theme idea was, if you guys remember a couple years ago, we had a grizzly bear that accidentally broke one of our windows in Rush's Grizzly Coast, and that exhibit had to be shut down for repairs for a while. So while that exhibit was closed down, we decided, let's let people into the habitat so they can see what it's like being on the other side. And we thought, a handful of people would trickle in throughout the day. And there was a line up around the corner to get in there because they're just so excited. And that's an empty exhibit. They're just so excited, so excited to be in where they've always come through and seen these animals. So we knew that that was going to be a hit. We knew that we don't have anything like that at the Minnesota Zoo so far. Yes, you can walk through birds, and yes, you can go in and pet goats, but we didn't have anything with a species like this. So again, we already had the existing holding. We knew we had to make some holding modifications and some exhibit modifications. We knew that we already had the nice fencing around, and we knew it was going to be kangaroo proof. The heights were right all the way around, but we knew that we were going to want to add some other fencing. If you go out there, we are running our camel rides, so we have a separation between grooves and children riding on very large camels. So that's when all that planning started. And so that's when we really sat down and got our animal list. So if you're at all familiar with Australian wildlife, there are certain species that are very prevalent in North America. Kangaroos, wallabies, and emu are all three species like that. Some species that are very difficult that we get asked all the time, are we going to have why don't we have them, are things like wombats, koalas, Tasmanian devils, and the real short answer is there's 11 wombats in the country, there's a handful of Tasmanian devils, and koalas cost an arm and a leg. So they're very hard to come by, they're very hard to bring into a zoo, and they come with a lot of rules and regulations, whether it be the Australian government having those rules or whatever facility they're coming from. So we landed on, again, the red roos, the wallabies, and the emu. The kangaroos and the wallabies, as we'll get to in a little bit, they came from the same facility that we bring in our African hoofstock from, and we've done Africa in the past. We went with red kangaroos. They are the largest species of macropod. They can get to 6 feet tall and weigh 200 pounds. And I've been trying to get this joke to land, but they're about my height and my weight if I lost a couple. So with the red kangaroos, we brought their cousin, the Bennett wallaby, and we do have Joey, so if you haven't made it out to the exhibit, we have quite a few babies poking their heads out or hopping around. The Bennett wallaby is in the same genus as the red kangaroo, so when people ask what's the difference between a kangaroo and a wallaby, it's very simple, they're cousins. The wallaby is just a smaller version of a kangaroo. In a lot of Australian literature, they just call everything kangaroo. So, but yeah, they are different. They're little brown guys. The kangaroos are the bigger red guys out there on exhibit. Wallabies would top out at 70 pounds for a huge male. Excuse me. And then last but not least, we also brought in 6 emu, the second largest bird in the world. And the best fact that I can tell you about emu is that their brains are the size of their eyeballs. And we will get back to that a little later. So while we're doing this planning, we also started researching what other facilities had done in the past. Now, zookeeping is an amazing field where everybody is willing to share their knowledge. It's not, we're not competitive with other zoos. We want other zoos to succeed as much as we do. So it's awesome with Social Network. I can hop online and find a closed macropod page and start asking a million questions. And also from being in the field for so long, I have friends at a number of other zoos. So we were able to contact Kansas City Zoo and talk with them about their parameters, their guidelines with a lot of the animals that we were going to be bringing in. We also, at the same time we were planning this exhibit, we were sending 20 prairie dogs to the Columbus Zoo. So I volunteered to drive them to Columbus. Don't ever volunteer to drive 20 prairie dogs across the Midwest in a van that only has an AM/FM radio. But yeah, and somehow no matter what you do, you hit rush hour in Chicago. But so we brought our prairie dogs to Columbus, and then I hung out for 3 days with the Columbus Australia keepers, and they have a very large Australian collection, and where the walkabout is actually just a small part. They have koala, they have a number of other species that you don't see every day in the United States in general. So we were able to go there and get a lot of their advice from them, the do's and the don'ts, what they really like, what doesn't work for them, what to expect. And then on the way back, Fort Wayne Children's Zoo in Indiana had a similar setup also, that they had a gorgeous Australia exhibit, so we were able to hang out there for an afternoon and kind of see how they do things there and get a lot of great ideas. We also were able to go to the Brookfield Zoo, which I interned at a number of years ago, and get some advice from them. And again, Kansas City and Blank Park, who have a history of exhibits similar to this. So while we were there, we were able to kind of get a feel for what their theming and their exhibit was, and what we were going to start pushing our exhibit toward, which direction we wanted to go, whether it would just be a wide open space and go on an Australian walkabout. And what we ended up landing on was an abandoned farm, but the real theme and the real area where the conservation message comes into play is that we're a research group in Australia working on the invasive and introduced species problems there. If you know anything about Australian wildlife, there is not a ton of predators out there. If you think of, at least the big kind of predators, if you think of Africa, you have your big cats galore, you have canids, you have all sorts of predators out there chasing down keeping the food web intact. In Australia, you have your massive crocodiles, you have 7 of the 10 world's deadliest snakes, you have dingoes, and then you have a bunch of small guys, and your birds of prey, you don't have a lot of those massive predators. So along the years, a lot of animals have been introduced to Australia, whether intentionally or most of the time unintentionally, and then there's nothing that eats them, there's nothing that preys on these species, and they just end up going crazy. So animals like feral cats, feral foxes, camels. You wouldn't think that our camel ride actually ties in perfectly. It's not just out there to make $5 a pop off kids. There are 750,000 feral dromedary camels in Australia. They were brought there as domesticated work camels, and then as soon as the combustion engine showed up, they were just set free, and there is nothing in Australia that could take down a camel unless you want by a crocodile-infested pond for a drink. Other species are things like toads, like just anything that's not from Australia that has been put in Australia has just gone crazy. So the theme of the exhibit is you're a researcher, you're helping with this research program, and your Jeep at the front of the exhibit gets stuck in the mud. There's a little recorder box. The kids get to push the red button and it tells you it's going to be a couple hours before you can get your help. It's in an Australian accent, but I can't do an Australian accent, I apologize. It's going to be a couple hours, so go investigate and watch out for the crocodiles and see what's out there. So once we had the theming, once we had the idea of what animals were going in, then we really started planning the construction and starting the construction. And because of Minnesota's climate, we started doing the construction early. If you guys come out to the zoo regularly, you would have seen animals off exhibit on that side towards the end of summer last year, and we started tearing up where the path was going to go. My favorite part of this exhibit is that it really showed what the Minnesota Zoo can do when all hands are on deck. So every single department was out there and lending a hand. And they're just awesome and great at doing it. So we had our carpenters working on our shelters, we had our electricians getting ready to actually put electricity in there so that our theming really had even more really cool aspects to it, like speaker boxes that play dingo sounds all day, every day. Luke's up in the back, and I'd like to thank Luke personally for the dingo sound effect that he listens to all day, every day. And we had our carpenters, our welders, everybody was out there, and they're actually really excited about this new work. And so you can see our new mechanic has a hobby of either collecting or just appreciates old military vehicles. And he was like, yeah, I can get you a Jeep, no problem. Like, first month on the job, he was just like, yeah, I got you this Jeep. So you can see we had our, dug out the path area. This is where the gatehouse was going. You can see this is all being done while there is snow on the ground, while we can still work out there, because there's no way we would get as much of the work done and open by Memorial Day had we done everything in the spring. So then in the spring of 2017, now the majority of the exhibit's done. Now it's just kind of putting the finishing touches on it. And that's a lot where not only all our shops guys were out there still working on this, but then our exhibit guys came into play. And again, like, we have the best, like, at everything they do. Our shops guys, everyone does they're the best I've ever worked with. But the exhibit shop is just amazing. They're the guys that make all the things that when you walk on the Tropics Trail, someone will yell snakes out because they've made a fake snake that looks like exactly like a real snake. I've had guests grab me by the shirt and pull me to the bat enclosure to show me that a bat is out, and it's just an artificial bat that they've made. So when you go out there, there's some really cool, there's a burrowing area where they made lifelike wombats. That's the only way we're going to get a wombat. But they made some wombats. We have a crocodile that is set to join the exhibit at some point here in the summer that is still being made by the exhibit shops. And I guarantee we will start getting guest comments that say, we are sick in the head for putting crocodiles out there. It will be fake. I'm pretty sure they'll figure it out once a duck starts sitting on it. So in the audio, video, and then all our signage. So when you go through the exhibit, that real theme of, and really educating our guests on just how unique Australia is, Australia's wildlife, Australia's ecosystem, and just how difficult the invasive species problem is. And again, here's some of the stuff that the shop guys did, the awesome lifelike kangaroo, and then our carpenters did like the kangaroo crossing signs and all the stuff that's out there that's just top notch. And we all jokingly, while we were building it, said we're building the best kangaroo exhibit in the country, and it's temporary. So while the construction was going on, we started doing our health checks with our animals. So our kangaroos and wallabies are getting around loan from Texas, and our emu are on loan from a gentleman in southern Minnesota that actually is related to one of our northern trail keepers. He studied in Australia for a year, loves Australian wildlife, and travels with a little Australian setup to like county fairs and church picnics and stuff like that. And he'll bring out, he has a kangaroo, a wallaby, little of this, little of that, but he breeds emu. And if you didn't know, emu farms got real popular at one point, so there's quite a few emu out there. So he bred, our emu are all under 1 year. The emu were bred specifically for our exhibit with the idea that they were not going to be hand-raised and imprinted on people, but they would not be afraid of people or timid around people. Now, our kangaroos, we had to fly down to Central Texas, where we met up with our mob. We went down with, it was myself, our collection manager, and one of our vets, and we went down and did our health checks and made sure everyone looked healthy before sending them up to Minnesota. So this was actually, I think, one of the first times that anyone ever tried using restraint on macropods. So you can see we simply escort them in one end. We can close down one of the sides while someone holds a tail. And so we can keep them sturdy. We don't have to anesthetize everybody because we would have been doing 35, 40 anesthetizations. That would make for really strenuous on the animals and also tiring for us. So we were able to, we microchipped them all, just like if you were to go to the vet and have your dog microchipped. Same idea, that way we have an individual marker on each one. A lot of them look identical, so we know who's who. We also did a couple different vaccines, and in general just made sure everybody looked healthy. So then about a week later, in early April, our animals started to arrive. So we had 2 different shipments. We brought kangaroos, or wallabies first, and then we brought kangaroos a week later. So they had some time to acclimate into their new habitat. We unloaded them up in, this is what we used to call Africa holding, and we should probably start calling it Australia holding. But this is where our wallabies were unloaded. And spent the first about week just kind of getting used to their new habitat. The big thing people ask about is how they acclimated to Minnesota temperature. These are heaters in their hut there. When we were communicating with the other zoos that I mentioned earlier, one of the big things we asked about was their temperature guidelines. And every zoo throughout the Midwest said the same thing. They're like, we open doors at like 35, and if they want to come in, they can. But a lot of times they won't. So we'll give them hot spots, we'll give them heaters, we'll give them heated floors. But these guys are super cold tolerant. In fact, the wallabies' natural range overlaps with some places that get snow. The kangaroos live in areas where it gets down into the 30s routinely. Now, by no means could they live in that habitat or in that holding facility all year long, but they're going to be here until October because they're so hardy. So everyone kind of came back with the same answer, somewhere in the 30s, kick out heaters. We decided to baby our animals. We kick them on at 45 and make sure they have access. And we also built heaters into some of the shelters on exhibit, so we can make sure these guys are comfortable all year round while they're in Minnesota. And a week later, our kangaroos showed up. With the roos and wallabies. The kangaroos, we made sure, again through asking other zoos and other facilities what they do with their walkthrough, we made sure that the loan agreement stated that all our kangaroos are 3 years old or under. So if you guys are familiar with some of those 6-foot, 200-pound kangaroos that you might see on the internet, they're very muscular, they're full of testosterone. They get that name, the red kangaroo, not only from their coat, but also this big red patch that they get across their shoulders when they're mature males. And most walkthrough exhibits won't keep an intact male in their walkabout part once they get over the age of 3. And so we ended up with a kind of strange ratio with the roos. We ended up with 15 males, 16 males, and 3 females. With the wallabies, we ended up with 6 males and 12 females. And again, a lot of those females, what we weren't anticipating was we had a lot of joeys right off the bat. So next we want to make sure that these animals are acclimated to their surroundings. So that included, we have a half-acre, we call it the half-acre pasture as part of the holding facility. That's an area that we originally planned to have them have access to overnight while they were in holding. But we first got them acclimated into that area, so they kind of started figuring out the routine of coming in and off, or in and out on that half acre. And then they could also see the exhibit. At this point, we were still doing a little touch-up stuff here and there. In the exhibit, it wasn't 100% ready, but they could start seeing the exhibit and getting ready to go out there. If you look closely, you'll see this is all caution tape and flagging. Anytime we introduce an animal to a new habitat, we make sure that the borders are clearly outlined so they know where they can go. Sometimes they don't see the fence right away, so we made sure that there was some sort of signal there. And that went all the way around the exhibit, so that entire 5-acre habitat had caution tape for a while. Then it was acclimating animals on exhibit. You can see emu learning how to be an emu dad in that sign. And also kangaroo on exhibit, checking out their pond. They will swim. We have not seen much swimming though. So next it was, since it's a mixed species exhibit, it's starting to introduce animals to one another. So the first thing we did was kangaroos to wallaby, and I've been a keeper for over 12 years now, and this is one of the first times I've been in charge of something this big, so I was incredibly nervous about putting kangaroos and wallabies together. We put them together in a half-acre enclosure that has the tallest fences. We made sure that there's plenty of spaces for everyone to eat. It was the boringest intro I've ever done in my career. They walked right past each other, couldn't have cared less. Absolutely couldn't have cared less. We have not seen, they'll eat from the same bowl, but otherwise it's just another day. These guys did live right next to each other for months, so it was basically our equivalent of how do we let animals see each other before they're ever placed together. We did that here at the zoo too when they came in, so they knew what was going on. I think the roos knew I'm bigger than you, and the wallabies didn't seem to care. So you can even see, as far as animal keeping goes, this is a pretty good sign that the wallaby are confident and comfortable around the kangaroos when they will let themselves be totally cornered in a shelter, and the kangaroos are just sitting there eating. Couldn't care less. They'd hop right by them. I've seen wallabies jump over kangaroos, kangaroos jump over wallabies. No problem. Next, kangaroo and emu. Now this one we kind of anticipated some chasing. We kind of all spread out throughout the exhibit and got ready to see what was going on. We slowly introduced emu into the kangaroo mob. And there was some chasing. Mostly the emu chased Canada geese, which, that's great. Go for it. Once the were gone, they would chase the kangaroo a bit, and I kid you not, the kangaroo would run, and then they'd get away, and then they'd slow down and stare and wait for the emu to catch up, and then they would start hopping again. So I watched the emu walk up to a kangaroo that was sleeping and started pecking at his tail, and the animal did not react. He looked at him for a second, did not react until the emu actually picked the tail all the way up and thumped it down. And then he stood up and took 5 steps and laid back down. The issue was when we introduced our wallaby with our emu. So again, our wallaby came in with a number of joeys. We hoped that they would figure out the same way the emu did. We created safe areas. Anytime we do an introduction, we make sure that there's a safe area where an animal could physically get away from another animal. So across that half acre, we put up some rope so that wallabies could easily go over or under, but they would hit the emu right in the chest and wouldn't be able to chase. So we put them all together. Emu chased the geese away, which we were like, all right, great, no more geese again. Good. And then once the geese were gone, they noticed there were these little brown guys in the exhibit, and if they ran past them, they would hop really fast away. And so they kept chasing, and because at this point we were looking at 40 plus animals in that exhibit, so these, again, brain the size of their eyeball. So they would run past a kangaroo, and then the kangaroo would have a wallaby run the other direction, and so then they would, stop on a dime and go chase the wallaby. Eventually we ended up with 6 emu on exhibit and 30 some odd animals in our half-acre waiting for the emu to go away. So we tried a number of different techniques. We brought in our bird supervisor who's worked with birds, every different species of bird. She gave us a number of ideas. And at the end of the day, we just said, we can't risk any of these wallabies getting injured or the joeys. So now we have 2 pens with emu in them. We continued to try some kind of soft introductions just to see. But then while all that wallaby chasing was going on, we would also have days where we would just put the emu out in the exhibit and let our guests walk through with the emu, and they're very attracted by shiny things, so necklaces, rings. We have a keeper who's lost an earring to one of our emu, and strollers were kind of very interesting for them. So we decided that the emu would probably have to take a break from the habitat. We can continue to try. Apparently, there have been some advances in harness training emus, so we might look into that. But for now, we let the emu out into the, if anybody's concerned, we have people ask all the time, when you go out there, one of the pens is a little smaller than the other. At the end of the day, we open up the camel ride side, and the emu gets to run around the camel ride track and down into the long grass and into there's a bunch of trees and stuff down there, so they have a great time. It's prime emu habitat, actually. So, once we had our animals acclimated to the exhibit, we're getting closer to Memorial Day, which is the grand opening. Throughout May, we decided that we should do some sneak peeks, open it up to the public. And one of the big reasons for this is we're also training these animals, we're conditioning these animals to utilize this habitat. I think when we talk about operant conditioning here at the zoo or animal training, we think about going to our bear demos and our monk seal demonstrations and seeing these cool behaviors that we train our animals to help with their health, their vet procedures, and some other ways to get people excited about the zoo, excited about the animals, but we don't talk about basic things like animals shifting on and off exhibit, or animals utilizing a new habitat. So we knew with the historically large crowds that we see on Memorial Day weekend, that if we were to open a walkthrough exhibit on a day that we knew we were going to have 10,000+ people, that these animals might not either appreciate that or might not react positively to that. So on weekends in May, and then any day in May that we had some free time in the afternoon, we started bringing in groups of people. So we started off like 25 people at a time. And that same talk I just had about these animals being conditioned to use these exhibits, we would have that talk with our guests that were going in there. So they knew, if you walk through slowly and use an inside voice and are calm around these guys and animals are close to the path, they're going to stick around on the path a lot longer than if we run through there screaming and yelling and getting real excited. As exciting as it is to see a kangaroo 3 feet away from you, well, we knew that if we didn't explain this to our guests, that the kangaroos might not really understand what was going on. Because I think for a lot of these animals, even though they're born and bred in captivity, it was going to be the first time that they were going to see these kind of crowds. So we were opening it up on the weekends, letting in a few hundred, we were working our way up a couple hundred people, a couple thousand people a day. And then on Mother's Day weekend, we had 12,000 people on a Sunday go through there. And if you've been out to the habitat, you'll see that the animals are absolutely fine with people being around them. To the point where, like, if I walk off the path, they'll just hop right past me. Or right away in the morning is the best time to come see the exhibit. 9:30 in the morning the exhibit opens. You can come out there, there's kangaroos, wallabies sitting either on the path, right next to the path. We just got out of field trip season, which was, we have 5,000 kids a day at field trip season, so the conditioning took a step back that week with that many kids, but yeah, really letting them understand that the grass is their place. People will not cross into the grassy area. If you guys want to come onto the path, that's up to you. We don't promote feeding in the exhibit. We don't promote touching any of the animals in the exhibit. So they really started to get accustomed to that. You can see in some of these pictures, a kangaroo right off the path. We've got a wallaby and her Joey sticking out of the pouch just on the other side of our shelter. And again, more conditioning here and more of our sneak peeks. Animals again, sitting right off the path, very close, so people can see them. Now our grand opening was Memorial Day weekend, and because I think a lot had to do with our sneak peeks and the excellent care that our staff gave, and really instructing people and monitoring that habitat. We had 30,000 guests, and I have not in a long time looked at comments on Facebook and seen so much positivity. So it was really nice to see everyone had a lot of nice things to say about the exhibit, that the animals were up close, the animals were active, and that they just, the lack of fences is, people can't get past it. You can see just the crowds there. This is shot right after opening. We had a line down the northern trail waiting for people waiting to get in. So with any exhibit, it's never done after opening day. There's always modifications we can make. We've made modifications to some of the shade structures. We've added additional trees. The real thing that these animals are looking for, especially this time of year and going into the hotter months, is shade. So we've been adding shade structures. We've added a couple sand pits recently so that these animals could have nice cool, the sand pits are nice. They'll dig up some of the top stuff and get to the cooler stuff so they can lay down. And we've just been looking for anything and everything that we can do to keep these guys nice and cool and comfortable. Again, they have their big ponds, and they do have shaded areas out there. And it is official, we will be back next year for Kangaroo Crossing 2018. We are looking into either adding another experience to the existing Kangaroo Crossing. We're also looking at different species that we could add. I talked about those really difficult ones to get. We can keep our fingers crossed and maybe we'll see one of those guys. But realistically, we'd see another animal that are pretty prevalent in American zoos. But I'd like to say thank you guys for listening. I'll do my best Australian. Cheers, mate! Was there any questions? Yes?
Any other zoos that you know that exhibit emus and wallabies together?
Yeah, the question was if there's any zoos that do exhibit emu and wallaby. Yeah, there are. And one of the reasons that we brought in 6 emu, because we knew that 6 emu probably, that would be ideal. It would be great if 6 emu could go out there with all those animals, and none of them would either be a problem with other animals or a problem with the guests. But it would take like a very unique emu and probably some pretty chill wallaby too. But there are some, and we did speak with some of those zoos, and they kind of had different exhibit setups too. Yes?
I'm curious about the Bennett's wallabies. The red roos make sense, they're big.
Mm-hmm.
Why the Bennett's as opposed to some other type of macropod? Is it just what's available, or?
Yeah, the question was why we did the wallaby, being that they're a smaller species. Yeah, one was availability, and one was if we wanted a little bit of that diversity too, in that if we got, the next probably prevalent available animal would have been a gray kangaroo, and then there's, it's difficult enough to, explain time after time the difference between kangaroos and wallabies. It's easy enough out there because you can say the red one, there's orangish red and there's little brown guys. But kangaroo, you'd have to be like, well, you see that orangish red one? and he's kind of gray. Well, then there's also that other kind of gray one, and they're about the same, similar sizes. So,
Well, I mean, just a comment. I traveled in Australia a number of years ago,
Okay.
and one of the things that just astonished me was flushing penny melons that were the size of rabbits. I mean, I wasn't accustomed to. I had no idea there was that diversity of macropods. So
yeah.
I guess that's one of the things I was expecting to see in the exhibit, even greater diversity. Than
Yeah,
this.
and that is one of the things that we might look into that we might see next year, would be looking at a different wallaby species. There are a few other wallaby species in North America, and then also wallaroo species possibly. Again, those are still macropods. There's a couple hundred different marsupials. The macropods are a little bit more, fewer species of those, especially in U.S. zoos. So a lot of it was the availability aspect. Yep.
The Toledo Zoo has some cassowaries. Could you guys look into that? Or I know they're mean and nasty. So
Yeah.
definitely like kind of thin.
Yeah. The question was about would we consider cassowaries, and I have contacted a friend of mine at the Jacksonville Zoo, who's a bird keeper there and takes care of cassowaries. And since we have this emu pens now, I thought, you know, we could try it. Do you remember the scene in Jurassic Park where they go and see the velociraptor habitat? That's what Jacksonville said that they had, and that they still weren't 100% comfortable. So,
Like I said, they're nasty.
they're nasty, yeah. So we talked about it for a minute, and we will continue to talk about it because they're cool. They're super cool, but we'd have quite a
I
bit
mean,
more
the Toledo's are
modifications.
really penned in.
Yeah.
You know, there's.
Yeah. There's work too. They have them down in Des Moines too. I saw another guess.
What's the closest species related to the kangaroo outside of Australia? Is there anything?
Oh, in America?
Or any place? I mean, anything outside? They only exist in Australia
Mhm.
naturally.
The closest relative would be the possum, because they're the only marsupial. And there's a number of species of them in South America, and then in North America would be a possum. Yep.
Being out there, the dingo sounds were very realistic and great, but the kangaroos didn't react to it. Wouldn't they normally be?
Yeah, the question was about whether or not whether the kangaroo or wallaby would react to dingo sounds, being that they're a natural predator. And again, all our animals were born in captivity. Never been chased, never seen a dingo, never been chased by a dog. So yeah, in fact, when it's rained in that exhibit, I've watched animals hop over and drink water off that speaker. We have a little female that routinely sleeps with her head 2 feet from it, like it sends her to sleep. So yeah, they're very, very relaxed. Yes, up top.
Does emu meat taste like chicken?
Does emu meat taste like chicken? I have not tried any emu meat. I would assume it probably does. I would guess dark. I will say that I'm very happy that our emu are so young, because when we did Africa and we had ostrich, the ostrich laid eggs all summer long, and our curator loved to bring in his portable camping cooking setup and make us breakfast. And it was the only time I ever thought about going to HR, because he was like, no, eat it, eat it, eat it. So I'm very happy that I won't have any emu omelets. Yes, follow up.
Weren't emus originally raised here for their meat?
Yeah, yes, they were. Yeah, emus were raised. That's why I said that there were a lot of farms prevalent. I heard that a lot of people kind of got, almost like it was a scam for a while. Like, you'll make all this money breeding emu on your farm. People sunk a ton of money into it and flooded the market, and it didn't go anywhere. So, yeah, just like there's ostrich farms and other, there's a lot of weird farms. So, yes.
You had mentioned having to give vaccinations to the animals when you were bringing them up before you brought them up from Texas. It surprised me a little, since they were bred in Hampton. I would have assumed they would have had routine vaccinations. Was there a particular difference in risk in the Minnesota environment that you were?
No, it it was just their routine vaccines. Our vets wanted to make sure that they were present when they were given. So, and then also, because we want to get our eyes on them and make sure that, you know, they're not unloaded before we open this exhibit and go, wait, these guys don't look very healthy. So we wanted to do our due diligence before we brought them on. So another hand, yes?
So some of the wallabies have little joeys. Do you have to give those back, or do you get to keep them?
Yeah, the question was whether the wallaby joeys will be going back. Yes, they will be going back. We dabbled with the idea of one going into our Close Encounters program, but wanted to make sure again that we covered our bases before we did anything like that and bringing in any more animals into our collection. So it wouldn't be crazy to think that someday we would have a wallaby doing some of our educational programs, but we'll see. Yes?
They can jump a long ways, but how high can they jump?
Yeah, and I totally forgot to cover that. Yeah, they can jump. The question was how high they can jump. The short answer is they can jump 6+ feet, and our fences are 6+ feet. And they can hop 25 feet in length in a single stride. Before we ever broke ground in the exhibit, we went through there, and that was one of the really cool things that we learned on our trip. Because at Columbus, I was like, these fences are like 5 feet tall, and like I saw wallaby pens that were 4 or less. And they all said the same thing. Like they need to have that head of steam. They need to be getting that top speed and have like a straight line. So if you look at our exhibit, the way we station things like the gatehouse, our shelters, our path, some of the debris that's out there, some of the trees, all of that was done strategically, so we were cutting down any of those straight shots where they would be getting that big head of steam to be able to clear something like that. I think we got how about one more question, and then I'll be hanging out afterwards to answer everybody's. But
I have 2 questions.
I said one. All right, go ahead.
Do you bring them into an enclosure at night? And then what about the natural predators and things like ticks and things like that that are...
Yeah, the question was, one, do we shift animals in at night? We tried to for the first couple weeks, and so we conditioned them. They would come in at night, just like a lot of our animals that we have out here at the zoo. They don't like loud stimulus, so the dinner bell was out of the question. But all their produce and all the really good stuff was always fed in their holding to get them to come into holding and feel safe in there. And that worked for a while, but when you put an herbivore on 5 acres of grass, it kind of loses its appeal. So if you guys were lucky enough to be out here around closing time on any particular day in May, you may have seen a lot of keepers looking a fool out there trying to herd and encourage some animals to go in. After that, we decided to abandon that idea and leave them with access. So animals can go up, and most of the animals do go up and in. I've spent a couple nights here watching after hours, seeing who's coming in, who's not. And through the evidence of their droppings, we can kind of tell who's coming in, who's going. Sorry. What was it? And then the other part was our native, yeah. So we have coyotes, we have foxes, we have ticks. We have started doing some tick prevention, some like stuff that a lot of our vet stuff is either human medicine, or in this case we'd be using like Frontline, like something that you'd put on a dog as tick preventative. And again, back to Luke's dingo box that plays throughout the night. That one helps us to already establish that there's a predator around. So the foxes, we have seen no evidence of foxes or coyotes anywhere in the habitat. We also walk the exhibit fence line daily. We make sure we get our steps in very early. We walk that fence line daily, and then we do head counts in the morning and at night. Make sure everyone's accounted for, everyone looks healthy, happy, and that, again, we're not seeing any of our resident animals trying to do it now. So, thank you again. I'll be around afterwards if anyone has any other questions, but I know Amanda's raring to go, and her presentation is way cooler than mine. So. Thank you guys very much. I feel like I did.
He thought he was going to go 12 minutes when we were up here testing. All right.
okay?
Yeah.
Thumbs up? All right, cool. So I'm Amanda. I usually work with the Zoomobile department, who has wanted a wallaby, and I've been lobbying for one for a while lately. Just heads up. So we bring animals all over the state of Minnesota. Sometimes we go around the Twin Cities, sometimes we drive 7 hours north of here, sometimes we stay in hotels with the animals, put like, the turtle in the bathtub and the skunk right next to the bed, and we put tarps all over the walls so the bird doesn't poop all over the walls. So that's my life at the zoo, which is, I think, pretty awesome. And this January, I did get to go to Tasmania to work with the Save the Tasmanian Devil program. And their primary goals is Tasmanian devil conservation. And we had some connections with them through one of our staff members' families, and it was presented as an option to go through the grant, and I snatched that one up really quick. And we also worked with the Tasmanian government. The program is funded through the government, and then the grant was through the Minnesota Zoo's Ulysses S. Seal Conservation Grant. All right. This is kind of cool because normally I'm holding an animal, so I feel like really free. I'm just going to show some cute animals first and make you fall in love with Tasmanian devils right off the bat. I know.
Vicious killer.
Yeah, really, really vicious. Watch this part. Oh, you got it, little guy. Because basically, if we don't know about an animal, if we don't care about that animal, maybe you don't care about cute and fuzzy things, but a lot of us do. We're not going to care about conserving them, so that's kind of what the point of this slide is for. Just take a look at how cute they are. This one is sunbathing up in the corner. Most of those other ones are pretty young babies. They don't like snuggling together in the bottom. This one's supposed to make a noise. It's supposed to be like really surprising and wake you up. There you go. So that is what a Tasmanian devil sounds like. When settlers came to Tasmania, I believe it was 1803, this is what they heard in the forest at night, had no idea what it was. So they thought it was literally the devil, or the devil's children, as a lot of them put it. And so they would tell people that once they found out that it's just this little marsupial, once they found out it was those little guys, they would still perpetuate the myth of, oh, when you see one, that's just the babies, like those are the infants. The real ones are, 10 feet tall and terrifying, and they'll steal your souls. And there actually is a B horror film. If you look it up, you can watch the whole thing on YouTube, starring Danica McKellar and Apollo Ono, like the speed skater. It's called Tasmanian Devils, and the basis is that it really is the devil, and they're up to attack people and kill everybody. So if you're looking for a really terrible movie that's actually pretty funny, that's one to watch. So devils are not like the Looney Tune Taz devils, although sometimes when they're fighting they can be a little bit like that, but no tornadoes. They don't really do that at all. They do have very sharp teeth. They have one of the strongest bite forces in the entire world for their size, so very, very sharp, strong teeth. And Looney Tunes, actually, there were some legal issues with using Taz, and the Tasmanian government was using it for certain things, and Looney Tunes and Warner Brothers weren't very happy about it. But in the end, they actually donated a whole bunch of money to the Save the Tasmanian Devil program. So, hey, good for that. Our Tasmanian devil was listed on the IUCN endangered as of 2008 because of the devil facial tumor disease, and that's kind of what this program is based around, although there's other things that added to it. The closest relative is the quoll, which certain species of the quoll are also threatened. That's the one on the, oh, I have a pointer. That's this one right here. So kind of similar, just different sizes, different patterns, sort of eat the same thing. So, and then also, they're both endemic to Australia. That's the only place that you're going to find them. And then Tasmanian devils, just found in Tasmania now. They used to be on the mainland 1,000 to 3,000 years ago, they think, but kind of driven out, especially by dingoes and some of the other animals out there. And then I have, pop quiz, I have prizes for whoever can answer this question. What is the last largest carnivorous marsupial that is now extinct? It's the one pictured right in the corner there. About right there.
Thylacine.
Thylacine. You get, well, you've already been to Australia. Catch? You get, oh, that doesn't go very far. Samples of Vegemite that I stole and brought back. Does anyone else want to try it? Anyone never tried it before? You want to try it? You guys can all share at the end if you want. She won't want to eat too much of it, probably. Lots of butter on toast. And some cheese is what I was told. I'm passing on ever eating that again. Ever in my life. Why are Tasmanian devils important? So they are a key predator. They're an apex predator in Tasmania. They are kind of at that top of the food chain, barring any hawks and owls that you might see too. They're the best defense against those invasive cats and foxes that Jim was talking about. There aren't a ton of foxes in Tasmania. It's just kind of that really rare report that you get now. They've kind of done a good job of getting rid of them, but every once in a while they'll find a carcass on the road, and then it kind of goes up into an uproar because where did this fox come from and why is it here? But a Tasmanian devil will eat fox kits or kittens for the cats that are all over Tasmania. But those animals weren't originally there, and they eat a lot of the native species, so that's why the devils are important to keep those native species safe. Even though the Tasmanian devils sometimes will eat those native species too, it's not their primary food though. And they clean up the carcasses of deceased. So if you go to Tasmania, how many of you guys have ever been there? Let's get that feeling first. So a couple of us, awesome. It is the roadkill capital of the world. There is roadkill everywhere. And it's a big issue there. But the devils will clean up the carcasses and clean up those roads. They stop, or they reduce the spread of fly-borne diseases by eating some of that food, some of the carcasses. There's some diseases that the sheep can get from those flies that kill the babies, so it's really important that their sheep industry is strong because there's a lot of sheep. It's like New Zealand. And also the tourism industry, huge draw for tourists. When I was talking to people at the airport, a lot of the people that I spoke with were like, gosh, I hope I see a Tasmanian devil. And I was like, oh, well, that's why I'm here. We would talk a lot about that. So huge for the tourism industry, kind of keeps a lot of things running over there. Why are Tasmanian devils in danger? Dogs that people have brought over, that's one reason. Not a main reason, also not a huge main reason. Old mine shafts, they fall in, they can't get out, they starve to death. Negative stigmas from a while ago, just like the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. A lot of farmers used to kill devils just because they thought that they were eating their livestock, when a lot of times it was just if a sheep got its foot caught in grading and it couldn't get out and it was struggling. They kind of go after things that are weak and dead or dying. They don't usually go after live animals that are especially bigger than them. They do sometimes, but not a main reason that those sheep were dying. And they would used to dig big pits for them around their farms, and they'd put like a pole in the middle, put the meat out in the middle so that the devils would smell it and come over and try and get it, and then balance the pole so that it flips. And so you'd get literally like dozens and dozens of devils that fall in this pit. and then they all either fight each other and kill each other because they're hungry, or they starve to death from there. So lots of devils dying that way. Again, not a main reason though. Roadkill, there were over 600 reported last year of devil strikes. We had to go out and get 2 devils while I was working at one of the facilities out there. And you scan them for a microchip. You see if it's one of your devils that had been released or microchipped at all. And just not really a fun thing to do. And both of those were not microchipped. So there's also a lot of roadkill that doesn't get reported. Even as someone who was traveling there for Tasmanian devils, there's a whole sheet that you fill out, or online app that you can fill out if you do hit a devil or if you see a devil. And I didn't even know that existed, so I can't imagine the number of people or the number of devils that have been hit. And you know, even I didn't know that that was a thing. If I hit one, I would have just probably sat on the road and cried a lot and would have gone about my way. The other thing is they eat animals that are on the roads. They use the roads a lot because it's easier. They don't want to walk through the brush. They're kind of the top dog there, so they just go on the roads. They're not worried about really being seen for the most part. And they get hit that way, and then also there's a lot of other roadkill, so it's kind of like a buffet for them. They can just walk the roads and look for food. So some of the places that I was at were telling people, if you can safely get out of your car, pull over on the side, and pull the roadkill, you know, whatever you did hit, off to the side, then that could save a devil too. So that was kind of a cool thing to have. So the main reasons that they're endangered is a bottleneck population. They think likely due to climate changes over a long period of time. So one was at the last ice age, and one was, there was some change in El Nino. I'm not a weather person, so I'm not sure what that was, but either way, it was a really arid, it was a really dry time, and their prey also went down. Apparently, marsupials have big fluctuations in their numbers sometimes. And because of that bottleneck population, they're really susceptible to diseases. When you have a really small gene pool and you get something in there that those genes can't take care of, then you get issues with them not being able to fight them off quickly without evolution, you know, working overtime. So there are some pretty nasty pictures on the next page, so if you don't want to see them, that's what's coming up. So this is the effect of the double facial tumor disease. And you can see that it mostly takes over the face. It kind of blows out the eyes, it covers the mouth, and essentially what they do is starve to death because they can't eat. So it's a pretty gruesome thing. I was lucky enough to not be on a team that was catching these devils. All the devils that we had were healthy for the most part, or not visibly sick. So this is what that tumor does to them. How did the tumor arise? I'm not a weather girl, and I'm also not a geneticist, so I wrote it out, and that's why we have a lengthy slide here, because that was not, microbiome was not my thing. I like the animal studies, weird. So it's a transmissible cancer. There was another type of transmissible cancer. It's a dog venereal disease, and it's about 6,000 years old, they think. So it's one of the oldest living cell lines that they know of, and it's all from one female for the devil tumors. So it's the same DNA in every single tumor. And that has changed recently. They have found a couple new strains with new ones arising. So there's DFT, devil facial tumor disease 1 and 2 are the main 2 ones. I've heard there's 13 different kind of varieties within those. And it stemmed from a nerve cell. Just the characteristics of that tumor cell stem from a nerve cell. So how did it happen? There's some sort of genetic mutation. We don't really know why. They think the shortening of the telomeres, which are kind of the ends of the chromosomes, and it protects those from deteriorating, and when you lose those, things kind of go crazy, and they kind of break apart, join together, And in the tumor, there's 4 of those that are kind of being mixed up. And there's also minor changes in the strain, like I said. There's 13 sort of different variations on the last one that I read. And there's epigenetic changes in the cancer, meaning the genes are being expressed in different ways because of a whole bunch of different factors. I heard a really good analogy to think of it like a screenplay, where the actors are the cells, and the script is your DNA sequence, and the director is all the environmental factors. So you might have all the same stuff, the actors, the setting, the script, but Quentin Tarantino's going to direct a different movie than Steven Spielberg. So I thought that was a good way to understand that. And how does it spread? Tassie devils bite each other a lot. It's kind of like saying hello for them. Like just think about, oh, hey, I have a higher position than you. Okay, nice to meet you too. So that's how they communicate. They're really tough animals. They're really, really strong little critters, and that's just how they communicate with each other. When they're eating at night, you can hear them. You can hear them all fighting, and they kind of tear apart the bones and the carcasses. And fighting actually sometimes helps get those pieces torn off, and then one can hobble off with a leg, and one can run away with an arm, and then they can go eat a piece by themselves. And since they bite each other a lot, that opens them up to this disease. And usually they bite each other in the face, that's where they bite, but they could get the disease in another part of the body too. So with this tumor, the cells are actually coming off, so this is the same code as that original female devil, and they slough off and grow in the wound, kind of like a transplant. So it's basically taking that tumor and injecting it with their teeth into the other devil. And since they have such a small gene pool, the body doesn't see those cancer cells as foreign. This is the part where I definitely have to read off because genetics. So there's a group called MHC genes, and that's what matches an organ donor and a recipient during a transplant. So there's a lot of different flavors or types of MHC and thousands of different combos. And during an organ transplant, your body should reject the MHC that's not your type or your flavor. So devils with different types of that MHC will still get the same tumor because they're so closely related. It is kind of interesting though, and they can't really figure out why that they reject skin grafts. So that's kind of an odd thing when they try doing that. The MHC is there, but there's a disconnect in how it's read by the body, by all the cancer-fighting cells in the body. In that dog disease, for 3 to 5 months, the tumor is growing, and the cells are growing. And that MHC is not there. They're not making it in the tumor. But then after that, the tumor kind of shrinks back because that MHC is being let out. And the body says, oh, I have a tumor. I better fight that. And then it kind of goes back, and then the dog becomes immune to it for life. And as a parasite, in a way it is a parasite, that's smart for it not killing your host. And with the Tassie devils, there's such a small population that it doesn't have time to evolve that fast. So that's why we're not seeing it moving fast enough to become that smarter parasite. And a vaccine, they have, I'll talk about it in the next one. What's happening now? Vaccine trials. So they've been showing some evidence of evolving the immune system, just kind of naturally. They have 2 parts that have shown immune function and cancer response that they haven't seen before in other devils. And then they've also kind of come out with a test vaccine recently. It was actually right when I got back that they publicly announced the study that has been apparently working so far, which was pretty interesting and exciting for everybody that I was working with. So what they did was they added a signal molecule and a protein that triggers the immune response. And then that DFT cancer cell was forced to put those MHC proteins out there. So it made it show there. They were in there before, but it made it show them. And you still have the problem of the genetics being so small that sometimes that body still doesn't recognize it, even when it is shown. but some devils will recognize it as foreign then. So what they did was they actually put more DFTD cells into the body as the vaccine, as a live virus, with that extra help to express that MHC, and it seems to be working, so that's good. It's not a huge pool that they can use for research subjects because there's not a lot of devils that they want to risk it not working on. So you got to try something, but we also need those devils for insurance populations to keep them going. So they did show that some of those tumor cells kind of completely disappeared though. So that's exactly what they're hoping to see, and they'll have to follow through with more and more studies when they can do that. Here's kind of a map on what those MHC genes are doing. They think of it as an ID card and showing it or not showing your ID. There's a quick version of it. And then we have the map of where DFT started, kind of up in the northeastern corner of Tasmania, and then it just spread from there. And that was 1996 that they first started seeing that. So this is more fun stuff. What's Tasmania like? It was awesome. If you ever get the chance to go there, I highly recommend it. It's something that I would have never, it's not a place that I would have ever thought to go. I've always had a longing to go to Australia, but I never really even thought about Tasmania. It is amazing, and it's easy to get around. It's easy even to drive on the left side of the road. And there's lots of things there to see if you're an animal lover. So some of the things that I saw, the mountains, the ocean, the woodlands, the farm, it's everything kind of in one tiny spot. There are lots of snakes. All of the snakes in Tasmania are venomous, every single one of them. I know. And when you're in the woods and looking through brush piles, and you know that those tiger snakes are camouflaged to look exactly like those brush piles, it is kind of scary. We actually had a guy in our campsite the week before I got there, got bit by a tiger snake. And luckily, it was a dry bite, so that was good news for him. Giant spiders. We had like the big huntsman spiders that aren't going to hurt you, but they move really fast. And when I was getting some tools out of the shed one day, one like jumped across my hand, and I think I screamed bloody murder and jumped like 4 feet backwards. And the guy was like, "Don't you know that there's spiders here and snakes? And I thought you worked with spiders." Yes, but when they surprise you, kind of a whole different story. There was a bushfire while we were on the island. There has not been a bushfire on the island for 60 years. And there, of course, was one that day. It was only a little one. Some kids started it, and they put it out pretty quickly. But the rangers were saying, they came for tea later that night, and they're like, "I think we need to do more practices and revise our bushfire plans, because maybe we weren't really equipped for that." So they'll be working on that one. Luckily, it was just little. And there's also a 15-foot great white shark on our beach. That was the huge talk of the town. And the town is population 0, but it's whatever campers come in there. So the town we're at doesn't actually have a real town. It's old barracks and inmate housing and officer housing, and then the park rangers. But everybody was talking about the giant shark that was swimming around. The weather was always changing. It reminded me a lot of Minnesota. Like sometimes I was freezing cold, you'd have your hat on and your mittens and your pants and your jacket, and then an hour later, it was like tank top and shorts weather. So really, really hot in the sun and really cool in the shade was what I found. Lots of mosquitoes too. When they emailed me, they're like, "Bring bug spray because there's a lot of mosquitoes." I go, "That's our state bird, I'm fine with mosquitoes." They have huge mosquitoes. Really, really big mosquitoes. And it was actually pretty similar to here too, just giant mosquitoes. And they get about 19 to 78 inches of rain a year, and 50 degrees is Fahrenheit is pretty typical average temperature for them, according to the Weather Channel website. And those are some of the animals that we saw. So this field up here This is our campsite. We had Forester kangaroos, Bennett's wallabies, and tons of pademelons all over the place. When you would go to the bathroom at night and you're walking around in the forest, you would hear, because the pademelons stomp their feet at you to try and scare you away. So it's really intimidating. Even though you know they're this big, you never really know, right? I saw blue-tongued skinks, blueies is what they call them, and that was exciting for me because I have blue-tongued skinks in Zoomobile. And I saw this blue-tongued skink in the middle of the road on one of my last days, and I was with my coworker there, and I like screamed. I was like, stop the car, and jumped out and took all these pictures of it. And he's like, okay, yeah, I guess you don't have them here, because this is something that they see every day. Along with the echidnas, there was one on the side of the road when I was looking at the blue-tongued skink. And I asked my coworkers, if you were in Minnesota, what would you, or just in the US, what would you be excited to see? And their answers were red squirrels and fireflies. So I don't think I was out of line by jumping out and taking pictures of the echidna and the blue-tongued skink. And they also had tons of wombats running around the campsite too. You would trip over wombats. I almost tripped over many wombats just walking around because they freeze when they see you walking by and they stop moving and stop chewing on their food. And they look like rocks and you can't see them. So they were all safe though. This is just a few more pictures of the landscape there. This was my lunchroom. Not a bad lunchroom spot to have. And then this is Cradle Mountain down below, and then that's kind of on the east coast of Tasmania, on the upper part there. So the goals of the Tasmanian Devil program: population monitoring, just getting data in the field, figuring out what's happening, get the numbers, because you got to have the numbers to report back and figure out what you're going to do and if those numbers are changing or not. Disease diagnostics. There's the Menzies Institute in Tasmania, so they do a lot of the work, along with some of the universities around there, on the vaccines and the disease itself and all the microbiome lab stuff. The wild management, getting methods for managing what's happening with the disease in the wild and how we can stop that, how we can control it. They started building kind of sort of islands of peninsulas, so marking it off so that devils can't get in or out, not real islands, but having those areas where it's safe. And then the area where I was at was Mariah Island off the east coast. So that was an actual island, and all the devils there were brought onto the island and disease-free, and they can kind of raise their babies there and have the place to roam, and that helps get the insurance population up so we can keep that gene pool healthy. And the insurance population is the last one. So they need 500 pairs, I think, was like the minimum goal that they need over the next 50 years. But 1,500 is more of a better estimate of what they would want for the gene pool. So we spent 6 days on Mariah Island. The researchers I was with were Julie and Phil Wise, and then I was also with 2 other interns. And one was taking it kind of just as a regular internship for her university. And then the other one was studying it for her PhD. And she's studying the genetics by finding scat. So she basically just found poo all over the island. And she'd find a poop and be like, oh! And she'd take pictures of it and put it in her little sample bags. So it was really funny seeing how excited she was about all the poo that we found. And this was our campsite up here. So we had our little tents. These are some of the rooms that are on the island left over from the inmate days. Not very much for accommodations. Not a very happy place. It was kind of eerie seeing some of those because you knew that there was 2 people living in those cells at least, and that's where they lived and worked. This is around the main town. This is kind of our station where we set up. And then I guess it is traditional in our grant PowerPoints to show our bathroom. So this is the luxury bathroom that we had, the nicer one. So this is just a clip on what the basis of Mariah Island was doing and what they're doing there.
The
It's a really good
Tasmanian
documentary.
devil is a lovable marsupial with serious attitude. A devastating disease threatens their species. Hope rests on a few devils born in captivity. Their mission, leave their safe surroundings, train for an elite squad, head for an isolated island, and life in the wild. This is a tough place. It will be a brave new world full of strange encounters. Not all will survive. This is the story of Devil Island.
So if you're interested, really good documentary showing what was happening and just getting a better feel for what the island was like. And I cried at the end because it's very emotional at the end. And I actually got to meet some of the devils that were on there. So some of the original devils, we caught 2 of those original devils. So they're kind of like celebrities to me. Like when we caught them and scanned the microchip, I was like, oh my gosh, they're from the movie. Here's some more shots of our campsite. So that is the poop that is everywhere. All over, no matter where you go. When I got back to my hotel the next day, well, after the week of being there, I put my bag out, and even though my bag was in my tent, like nice and safe, wombat poop fell all over my hotel room floor. So somehow it even got in my tent. And you can tell it's wombat poop because it's square. It comes in a cube. So it's easy to identify that. And Tasmanian devil poop, there's a few pictures coming up, I think. A lot of times they have objects in them because they eat things like wetsuits and zippers and anything else that they find. So we found some very interesting fecals out there. There's so much poop because there are so many grazers around. That picture with the kangaroos that I had earlier, I mean, that's everywhere at dawn and dusk. And one of the things about Mariah Island is it's a really controversial project. A lot of people are really against it. A lot of people are for it because the Tasmanian devils aren't originally on Mariah Island. So you're introducing this predator. You saw the kangaroo was not very happy. That was trying to kick it. I don't think the devil thought it could take the kangaroo down. But a lot of people are mad because there are little penguins on the island. There's Cape Barren geese. So this team has to do a lot to monitor those populations as well. It's not just the Tasmanian devil, it's all the other animals on the island that they're affecting too. And because the Tasmanian devils will feed on some of their young sometimes. But sometimes that's a good thing because this whole field is all grazed down. Like normally most of this would be like tall grasses, so you can see that there are a lot of grazers around. I heard a story about wallabies, cute little wallabies hopping around, and a lot of times you'll see them eating roadkill because they eat the stomach contents of that grazer because, hey, they found more food. And they'll have like blood dripping from their faces. And they'll just stare and look at you while they're holding this stomach and this cute little wallaby looking like a vampire. These are the Cape Barren geese that are right there. And they fly into the island, so they don't really have to be there. So if they wanted to avoid the devils, they can avoid the devils. The penguins are a little bit more hard. They have made some nesting boxes that have given them special like escape routes so that they can keep their populations in a safe place. So this is what most of our traps how we set them up. We put them into the brush, put them away from the road so that the tourists that are out camping on the island, maybe a couple hundred people there at a time, don't see them and mess with them, even though there's warnings all over them. They're just a PVC tube, and you just tie a knot on it and string a piece of meat down to the other end. So the devil walks in there, they pull on the meat, and the trap shuts. It just kind of swings shut. It's really pretty simple, but very effective. And the devils just crawl right in there. Sometimes they prefer to be in there. Like, you might think, well, that's a small, tiny space. They're smart animals, so they've learned, and they've seen them after they release the devils. They'll walk right to the next trap and go right in the next one because there's a snack in there, and they know they'll be released within 24 hours, so they just go from one to the next, which kind of skews results, but it just shows that they are pretty smart. This is our setup in the corner here. And then, just like the exhibit that we have, we broke down 3 times and had to wait for help. So we had I'm not a mechanic, something broke on our side-by-side. We had flat tires. We also had a fuel line bust, and there was fuel everywhere. I didn't. My research partner did. We had to crawl underneath, and it was like drenched in fuel to try and get it back. And we had to sit there and wait in the bush for like an hour till the park ranger could come get us. And what was awesome about that is it was the only spot within a few miles where we could get cell signal. I don't know why right there, but for some reason we got a signal right there where we broke down. And then this is the other one that we used. So we used a ute, a truck, and then we used a side-by-side. I was lucky enough to be in the truck most of the time, especially on the rainy day. So there was no complaining the day that it absolutely poured from me, because the other team had 3 people in the side-by-side all day long because it was pouring rain. So we were pretty lucky on that part. And the weather was pretty good for the most part. The thing that was just a little harder was you don't get to shower. And when you're stringing up wallaby parts all day and you're covered in like wallaby juices from the bags, it's not a good smelling time. And plus, Tasmanian devils are really stinky too. And that's why people don't eat them. That's why they're not good for meat. They used to feed the meat to the convicts a long time ago, but that's pretty much it. You don't really want to eat them. This is the whole island up here. It's 12 miles long, and we camped around this area. So the other team spent their days around here. This is the town. And then my team kind of took this area right here. Right here is that beautiful beach that you guys saw earlier. And the campers that were there had a pretty lucky timing as far as if they wanted to see devils or not, because we had a program, lots of kids, people at the camp all came to watch a PowerPoint on the devils and the research that they're doing. And we had lots of like games and masks and things up there. And then we also, the next day, did a couple devil releases for the campers. So we would call them over when we found one, and kind of gave them a time and told them there might be devils, there might not be devils, and we were lucky to have a few devils in those spots. So they actually got to see them, which is very rare. Like, you really don't get to see devils running around everywhere unless you go to one of the parks. And then up here is are the other interns putting up the camera traps. So they put up a lot of camera traps for monitoring them at night, just to see who they're seeing. They all have different markings. They can kind of identify a lot of them by the markings. So camera traps are really important, and also an expensive thing when you're doing research out there. So this is kind of how we process the devils. We would catch them in the tubes, dump them out slowly and gently into a sack, weigh the sack. We would check the pouch first to see if there were any babies in there. I had just off timing where it was just getting into breeding season, so I was only a couple months away from seeing babies, which I was really sad about, but what are you going to do? So no babies that we saw, no pouch young, no little imps, or what they call them. And you just basically put the devil in your lap, and they kind of go into this like catatonic, like, okay, like just do whatever, then let me go. And so they have a really big system of dominance, and you knew that you weren't going to have an easy time doing an exam if you looked into the bag and there was a really big male with lots of scarring on his face, because he's the top one around that area. He's been in a lot of fights. He's established his turf. So he's not one that would sit still for very long. So some of those, it was just a really quick exam. But most of the other ones, if they're younger or if they were female, they really just sit there. And so we measured all sorts of different things. The most important is looking to see if there's any tumors. Because if there were tumors that we found, it would be kind of catastrophic to the whole thing. So no tumors, which is great. And this is us getting the injections ready. So we did contraception for some of the females. And you might think that that's kind of opposite of what you're going for when you're trying to establish an insurance population. But there were some females that were way overrepresented in the population genetically. And we wanted to give the other ones a chance to raise their young and have enough room. So we had 10 females that we set out to contracept, and then 5 alternatives. So if we found a different one, we could do that one instead. And then lots and lots of lists and records of what we were doing. Here's some of the sheets. You can't really read them, but apparently up here. But it just lists which females that we were looking out for. The ones up there, I think we have Hermione Granger, and Narnia, and Wonder Woman. And then a lot of the other ones, it's either superheroes. We counted Hermione Granger as a superhero. Superheroes, volcanoes, or some of them are just names because they didn't start a system then. But every breeding season they pick kind of a new thing to name the babies after. So we got national parks. So all of the ones that we found were named after national parks. And on the sheets there, you can see there's like a drawing where you can put and make notes on different parts of the bodies, maybe where there's a tumor or where there's a laceration or something that just isn't quite right. We measured all the teeth. You can tell how old the devils are by their teeth, or at least estimate them. You can tell how much wear their teeth has, where the enamel is. If there was pouch young, those all get recorded and marked for each one of those, so we didn't really have to worry about that. But it was kind of interesting. One thing that I learned was the pouches are all different based on how old the females are. So some of them were just like normal, like there's a pouch. And some of them had like this brown goo in them, and some of them were, they had, you could tell if they were getting ready to nurse or if they had been nursing last year, kind of depending on when the babies, or how many babies they had, and you kind of could see an estimate of maybe what they were up to. We recorded lacerations and puncture wounds. This one right here had some pretty deep puncture wounds, the one in the corner here. So we did have to like put some medicine on him. Usually they don't intervene a lot, they just kind of let things happen, but when you have a really deep wound, you take care of it. And there are a lot of puncture wounds. They fight all the time. They look like they're messed up, but that's just normal for them. And then we also took care of, or counted the ticks. Lots and lots of ticks. One had like 40 on his ears. And I mean, they're huge ticks. And then they get this scabby, itchy disease from the ticks, just from what they leave on their skin. So sometimes we would take care of that too, or at least record how severe it was. And then we have our pictures that we take of them, so each one has a picture of the markings so we can keep track of who's who. There's us setting the traps again, and then cleaning the traps. Lots and lots of cleaning, because if you're dealing with animals that potentially have a disease, you want to make sure all those traps are nice and clean. And then some of the babies that we found this year. And then here's some of our releases that we did, just kind of compiled in. And I set the camera up, so like some of these are taken, I just would have like the camera going for 20 minutes while we did the processing of them. And the one that, we did slow-mo too, because that's awesome. The one that we caught that I got to name, we had this whole 20-minute long video, perfect angle, and he sat in front of the camera for like a whole minute before he ran away, just like looking around, and we were both like, wow, this is really awesome footage, this is amazing. And I looked at the camera, and it had turned off 1 minute before release. And I told my partner, I was like, I'm not ever going to get this. He said, you shouldn't. That's never going to happen again. So you can see they kind of, when you open up the bag, they kind of like look around for a second, figure out where they are. They kind of get released out of that like frozen state, and then they just take off. And they kind of like, their eyes are glazed over, and then you can see them snap into it again. And these are, I've told them I'm claiming them for the zoo, for devils to follow. So these are the two that I got to name. This little girl up here is Glacier, since we named them after national parks. But it sounds much prettier when the Aussies say it. They're like, oh, Glacier, that's a beautiful name. I'm like, yeah, Glacier. It doesn't sound as pretty when I say it, but yes, you say it like that. And then this is little Voyager. So he, kind of perfect name, I think, for a Tassie devil too, because they explore so much. So he had pretty severe scabby groin syndrome from the ticks. He had the most ticks that we found. He had the deepest lacerations. So he's just kind of a little scoundrel. And then we left the island. Then I went off kind of on my own to a couple different other sites. So I spent 2 days working at a free-range enclosure. These are set up. There's, I think, 4 around the state. And it's a 54-acre area with 2 big fences so that nothing can get in and nothing can get out, is the plan. But I guess wombats like to dig really far underneath, so every once in a while you'll get a wombat in there. But basically it was caring for the animals in these enclosures, doing zookeeper things, helping out, a lot of picking up poop. That's what we did for a lot of it. There's devil poop. And then checking the fences every day, checking the perimeter to make sure there's no holes, that nothing's going to escape or come in there. And then also stringing up food for the devils to eat. So they put them on feed poles, and then they have the camera trap set up. Because otherwise they don't really know how many devils are in there. They're not really sure. I didn't get a number on how many are in the free-range enclosures or how many originally were put in there. So there might be lots of them or not a lot of them. But they kind of keep track of that through the cameras. And then I also spent 2 days at their, they call it an intensive captive facility. And it sounds really scary, but it just means there's a lot of devils here. And there's a lot of them to take care of. I think about 100 is what they can usually have there. So lots and lots of pens set up for the devils. And some of them that are in here might have the disease. They don't know yet. They kind of have to wait a few months before they find out. They found these 2 little sisters while I was there, so they were just living in. This guy was very curious about me, like, hey, I don't know you, because devils are apparently kind of like dogs or foxes do this, or parrots, where they're like, yeah, you raised me, I like you, or you're really nice to me, give me treats, I like you, let's be friends. So I think he was wondering who I am. And all the pens are set up with some really awesome things for them to run around and climb and play on. Lots of enrichment for them. That's a big part of their day, just as it is here at the zoo. We went out to the beach and got seaweed. So there's just piles of seaweed that they can rummage around in. Lots of sticks. I was totally expecting a snake to be in here. I was waiting for it, but nope, just brush pile. So we spent a whole afternoon sawing logs for enrichment and sawing branches off. We also spent an afternoon making popsicles on the hot day. So those are popsicles filled with sheep poop and wool and chicken broth and some sort of nut, and all sorts of things, some flavorings, just kind of whatever they had in there that would smell good or taste good, threw it all in there, froze them, and then distributed them out to the devils. So here's some of the devils that are at that place playing with the popsicles. And usually there weren't very many more than 3. I don't think they really keep more than 3 in there. Some of them have their pens all to themselves. Some of them have kind of like the howdy doors, where if they have a potential mate that they're going to be bred with, that they kind of share an area so they can smell each other, and then eventually kind of go into the same pen. And we moved some devils around one day. If they needed to go on a diet, they had to go in special pens. If they were going to be bred with this one, they're going to go in this special pen. So it takes a while to catch them all up, set the traps again, and then move them. But places like this, again, they want the 500 breeding pairs, but 1,500 maybe better. And then plans with overseas zoos to take individuals that they can no longer use for breeding that aren't genetically valuable. That's where kind of all the paperwork and the permitting and the really strict regulations are on Tasmanian devils and a lot of other Australian wildlife. So sometimes that might be a barrier for places to have it. And it just kind of shows the important role that zoos have in these animals. Not only are we helping them go do things, but just the husbandry knowledge that we have so we can take care of these animals so that they don't disappear. We need to have these places to keep them safe until we do figure out what's happening with DFTD. And could it go away on its own? Sure. But they're thinking at the rate that they're disappearing, there's only, I mean, it's gotten 80 to 90% of the devils on the island since that 1996. So they're thinking it's probably not good to just let it go on its own, so that's why they want to keep these devils in captivity. I also got a chance to go around to some of the wildlife parks that partner with the program. So they have the devils, they exchange the devils, some of them use them for programs, like this little guy over here. So he gets to see people and be an ambassador devil. The kids pet him, which having animals that we show to groups, I don't know if we would be able to do that with the teeth, but you know, it's a different place. And then a lot of them had wild kangaroos that would just come because they fed them. So they might not even have kangaroos one day at their kangaroo site, and then but other days the wild ones would come because they knew that they would get food. It was cool to see how they show their animals and how they interpret them. So each place kind of had a different way that they went about interpreting their devils and teaching about them. And as an interpretive naturalist, that was interesting to me. And then just the different setups they have for the education too. So what can you guys do to help? You can support organizations that help fund these programs. That's a good start. There's a donation site on the bottom here. If you guys do donate, in the comment section, just maybe write like Minnesota Zoo or something. Let them know that we're the ones that shared that with you. And don't litter. Remember I was talking about how the devils eat all sorts of things? That's a wetsuit in the poop. So, I mean, our litter can even make it over there, you know, wherever we are. Just don't litter. That's an easy one. And be mindful when you travel. Especially around there with the roads. It was really hard not to speed. Super, super hard, because the speed limit was pretty low, and you're driving, you know, 3 hours or 4 hours to get from one thing to another. And even someone who is really aware that there are Tasmanian devils around and you don't want to hit them, it's hard not to speed, especially when you're trying to see something after work and get from one place to another. There were some really eerie forests that I drove through at night. And the only stations that come in was this mix of Christian reggae and early 90s music. And hardcore rap. And all these stations are playing and it was just really weird and you're just trying to get home because it's just kind of eerie. And so I remember belting to My Heart Will Go On as I'm driving through this creepy, creepy forest trying not to speed. And every once in a while this wombat would be in the middle of the road and not even care. They just don't even care. And they don't run away or anything, you just have to wait till they leave. So you're always on the lookout for those animals on the road. Do your part for a healthy planet. I think that's a general thing. Tell others about it. Sharing our story, you know, maybe one other person gets inspired. And if you don't like Tasmanian devils, that's okay. Maybe there's something else here. One thing that I kind of learned while I was over there is the Australian wildlife parks specialized in Australian wildlife pretty well, because that's what they had, that's what they knew. And even though we might not think that red squirrels or fireflies are that cool, other people are really excited to see them. So maybe there's something around here that you guys want to get involved in, whether it's a Tasmanian devil across the world or like a Blanding's turtle or wood turtle in Minnesota. You know, find something that you love. And then there's the photo credits and where I got some of my info. Any questions? Yeah.
2 questions. What is the population of devils on Tasmania, approximately? And then also you talked about, you know, how people used to trap them and shoot them. Has that attitude changed, or what's the mindset now?
Sure. So the first question is, what's the actual population of Tasmanian devils in Tasmania? My researchers that I was working with got asked that by almost every single person on the island, and they just said, we really don't know. It's so hard to trap them in the western part of the state, and it's such good Tasmanian devil territory that there could be 10,000, there could be 50,000. It's just really hard to say. All they do know is that sightings of the Tasmanian devils have gone down 80 to 90% across the state. And then the second question was?
Change in attitudes toward them.
Change in attitudes toward them. What is the change in attitudes toward them now versus when they were trapping them a lot? It became illegal to trap them in 1941. And so legally, people can't shoot them or trap them or kill them anymore, but some people still do, just because they've stuck with that bad reputation. And it's just hard for people to kind of get over that, it seems like. And I asked a lot of people that when we were at the wildlife parks, they were saying how that's all they knew about them. All they knew about Tasmanian devils is that they were vicious, that they were mean, that they killed everything in their path. And when like the keeper would go in to feed them, people would be screaming. They'd be like, "No, don't go in there, it's dangerous." I'm like, I'm pretty sure she knows what she's doing. Like, she does this every day. But I think it's just more of an attitude. So it does still happen, but a little bit more secretly. And not so like, hey, I caught 40 devils yesterday, because people would brag about them in the past. I know it's late. I'm tired too. All right, if you have any other questions that you can think of, let us know. Send an email. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.